Welcome to our lecture hosted by us. And our guest speaker is Anna Whiteside, who is the Assistant Director of the Honors College here at Georgia College. And we are going to be talking about, we're going to start with a brief history of feminism and feminist idols and how they have formed feminism today. And then we're going to go into the topic of where feminism is now and how it's impacting the culture today in 2020. And then after that, we're going to be covering why we need feminism and the impacts that it is having on communities today. So I would like to introduce Anna Whiteside. So go ahead and take it away, Anna.
Hi, everyone. As has been said, my name is Anna Whiteside, and I'm here today to talk to you about the F word. So I hope you're ready for that. And by the F word, yes, I do mean feminism. And I often call it that because I feel like there have been times in the past where I have dropped that word during a meeting and people have reacted to me as though I had just said a very bad word. And I think that there's a reason for that. It's because feminism and feminist are words that we still have a lot of disagreement with the use of in this country. And most of what I am going to be focusing on is US centric, because this does sort of depend on other countries, it changes. But it is a word that sort of has a really in-depth history. The word feminism was first brought about in 1837 by Charles Fourier, who was a utopian socialist from France. Talk about words that have loaded meanings, both utopian and socialist also certainly have those loaded meanings. But the reason that Fourier came up with this term was because he believed that women should have equal rights as men. And even though feminism does get sort of debated a lot in terms of what it actually means, that is sort of the very base definition of it. I wanted to go ahead and pull up what I think is the golden key to all dictionaries, the Oxford English Dictionary. Feminism has a few different things, including it apparently used to mean feminine quality or character, femininity. That meaning is not used much anymore. The meaning we use for it is advocacy of equality of the sexes and the establishment of the political, social, and economic rights of the female sex, as well as the movement associated with this. Also, another term that gets used a lot is womanism. And womanism was actually a term that arose because of some of the things we're going to talk about, which is that feminism, one reason people are hesitant to use the term is it has been in the past sort of exclusionary, and womanism was actually a response to that. Another commonly associated word is women's liberation. So one of the interesting things to me about feminism is, like I said, it is often viewed as an ugly word, and I wanted to do a little bit of looking at what different celebrities had to say about feminism before we really dive into the history of feminism, because I think it's important to understand how different people think of, again, this very loaded word. And there are a lot of interesting things that celebrities who have apparently not identified as feminists have said. Just going to read to you a few quotes. Evangeline Lilly, who was in Ant-Man and the Wasp, also Lost, for anyone that stuck with that show. That wasn't me, I did not stick with it. I'm very proud of being a woman, and as a woman, I don't even like the word feminism, because when I hear that word, I associate it with women trying to pretend to be men, and I'm not interested in trying to pretend to be a man. I don't want to embrace manhood, I want to embrace my womanhood. So there, Lily was talking about not the definition of the word, but what the connotation of the word, so the things we think of with feminism. Kelly Clarkson, who is probably one of my favorite American Idol winners, and this was disheartening to me because I really love Since You've Been Gone. That's like way before y'all's time, but she produced some like great breakup songs. As Clarkson says, no, I wouldn't say feminist, that's too strong. I think when people hear feminist, it's like, get out of my way, I don't need anyone. I love that I'm being taken care of and I have a man that's a leader. I'm not a feminist in that sense. So again, that's not really quite what the definition of feminism is. Lana Del Rey had a super wonky answer. Again, like her music, but this answer was wonky. For me, the issue of feminism is not just an interesting concept. It's just not an interesting concept. I'm more interested in, you know, SpaceX and Tesla. What's going to happen with our intergalactic possibilities? My idea of a true feminist is a woman who feels free enough to do whatever she wants. So what's interesting there is she's sort of getting at what feminism is. I'm not sure what intergalactic possibilities have to do with any of that, but she's sort of getting at it. A lot of feminists really like to use the word humanist. Susan Sarandon, I think of myself as a humanist because I think it's less alienating to people who think of feminism as being a load of strident bitches, and because you want everyone to have equal pay, equal rights, education, and healthcare. And I left the B word in there because that is part of what I think a lot of people think of when they think of feminism. Again, if you go back to the dictionary, that's not really part of being a feminist. It's a very basic definition. So the history of feminism, I think, is really important to understand if you're going to understand where we are now. It is certainly one of those movements, as with any movement, where historians have put it into a few separate subcategories, but those subcategories and generations really blend into each other, which is something that I think is interesting about feminism, but that's also been made it hard for feminists to come together, because my feminism is not the same as my mother's feminism. I was born in a time where I had access to laws that would protect me as an employee. When I was born, for example, my mom was not guaranteed that she would be able to have her job when she came back from taking maternity leave. This was in the 80s. So she had me, and that was actually really risky for her, whether she would be able to have her job or not. We have made some strides in that respect, which I'll get to a bit later, but my mom and I come from totally different backgrounds. And then even from that, I come from a completely different background as my grandmother. I own a house under my name. I did not have my husband co-sign that house. That would have not been something that I could have done if I was buying a house when my grandmother bought a house. So we women have sort of a common experience, but we also don't have a common experience because feminism has really made a lot of strides over the past 100 years. Your first wave of feminism happened in the early 1900s, and the main goal for that was women being able to have the right to vote. And that was pretty clear-cut. There were specific demands, and that's where you hear the term suffragette. There were specific demands that we need to have the right to vote, because if we don't have the right to vote, where are we being heard in government? And that was really the main aim of the first wave of feminism. Thinking about what was happening in terms of entertainment in those days, this was before we had talkies. This was when there were silent films. So women in movies literally weren't talking. The men weren't talking either, but the women definitely weren't talking, and they were generally portrayed as being very, very innocent, very one-dimensional. You might see a lot of movies with the actresses Lillian Gish or Mary Pickford. Lillian Gish was in fact in the super racist and problematic film Birth of a Nation, where she plays the white woman who has to be protected from everything. And so very different from today, what we're seeing in the media today. Women who were in vaudeville actually got to talk. And so in vaudeville, like on the stage, you did see women who were a little more progressive in terms of speaking. There was Ma Rainey, was a blues singer actually from my hometown of Columbus, Georgia. Ma Rainey sang actually about lesbianism or bisexuality. This was in like the 1920s, so that's big. She was an African-American blues singer who did, a lot of people haven't remembered her. There's sort of been a resurgence, but she was pretty big in the blues community. In the day, there was also a woman, Sophie Tucker, who was a vaudeville comedian, and she actually was one of the first people to integrate what she called fat girl humor. She had songs including I Don't Want to Get Thin, and Nobody Loves a Fat Girl, but oh, how a fat girl can love. Wasn't able to find any recordings of that, so I'm not sure, what her take on body positivity was. I know that she never tried to lose weight. She was cool with how she was. She was someone who was very, very outspoken, but she also, we were hearing like the really early threads of, I'm not a feminist, I'm no suffragette, she declared. So flash forward, after women got the right to vote, we had World War II, and we also had the 1950s where World War II women had gone to work. We had the famous, and I have her on my keychain, Rosie the Riveter. Women actually went out into the workforce. Women joined the army and the military. In fact, Georgia College was the home of the training grounds for the Waves, one of a few homes, but we actually trained here women who were going to go serve alongside the Navy. So women actually did go out into the workforce during World War II, but then after the war was over, women had to basically go back home. Men needed to have their jobs back, and those jobs did not belong to the women, even though women had been, busting their butts doing work during the war. I mean, the men had as well, but we still saw it as being this dichotomy that women are working, men are not. The next wave of feminism really was spearheaded by a couple of books, Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex and Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which really tackled how women are influenced by power structures. So we had been able to vote, but women still didn't have the same ability to work. Just as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who recently passed away, who was already going to play a big part in this talk, is now going to maybe play a bigger part in that. She was unable to find a job, even though she had graduated from Columbia Law School. Could not find a job because she was a woman, and people would flat out say, why would we give you this job? You're a woman, you don't have to support a family. So during that time, you really saw some big gains with feminists trying to upend the social structure to really integrate all boys clubs that a lot of businesses had become or had really always been. And the main gain was trying to get an amendment to the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Rights Amendment, which unfortunately didn't pass. But in those days, you had the pop icons were Gloria Steinem, which, if you are interested in her, there's part of the resurgence of feminist history media. I'm trying to think of like a good way to put that, but I've definitely noticed since 2016, we've had a lot of films and TV shows about feminist icons. Gloria Steinem is actually in Mrs. America, which is a TV show about the early feminist movement. Uzo Aduba just won an Emmy for playing Shirley Chisholm in that. So I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking, that's next up on my list of things to watch. So that looks like a good way to sort of learn more about second wave feminism. You also had Jane Fonda, and one really important film that I think really encapsulates what second wave feminism was all about is 9 to 5. I almost forgot that I was talking to you on computer and asked how many of you had seen 9 to 5, and I would not have gotten any hand raises because I can't see you. 9 to 5, which was, again, part of the feminist resurgence. It was recently made into a Broadway musical, so people might be more familiar with it through that, but it's a film with Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, and also Dolly Parton, who wrote the song 9 to 5. I'm a big fan of Dolly Parton, so that was probably why I watched the movie for the first time. But the movie is about these women who are working for Dabney Coleman, who plays just the biggest jerk. He's awful. Dolly Parton is his secretary, who he routinely sexually harasses. Lily Tomlin has been working at this business for years and years and years and can never seem to get ahead. And Jane Fonda is a new hire there. And so it's really about these women. Yeah, okay, so there's some, like, they accidentally think they've murdered their boss and they kidnap him. So there's some of that in there, but really it's about the idea of what an ideal female work environment would be. One reason I would suggest watching that movie is you can watch it and be like, huh, Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin and Dolly Parton had some good ideas about what a workforce should look like for women. And it's a shame that we're now like 40 years later and none of those things have happened. Then during the 80s, we had the third wave of feminism. And one key event that really kickstarted this was Anita Hill. Again, there is a mini series on Anita Hill starring Kerry Washington that came out a few years ago. So like really, I think we are now in this era of feminist resurgence in the box office and also in items being marketed. The keychain that my mother got for me that I just showed you, this is definitely one of those things that I think sold really, really well in the past few years. So people are definitely making money off of feminists right now. The third wave was really a response to the fact that the second wave of feminism was really directed towards white middle class women. It was directed towards women who were staying at home, stay-at-home mothers, and unhappy about that. And it wasn't so much directed towards women who were having to work and struggling. And so the third wave of feminism is a lot more inclusive. That's when we really started using the word intersectionality to start to describe that, okay, you're not just a woman. You might also be a lesbian, or you might be queer, or you might be African American, or you might have differing abilities. Intersectionality is really looking at the fact that we as human beings take a lot to the table. It's never just a woman, that's it. We have other identities, and intersectionality actually paid more attention to those differing identities. So that the third wave of feminism really allowed for there to be other voices in terms of feminism. There were two names that I left out when talking about the second wave of feminism. Florence Kennedy and Angela Davis were two Black women who really got ignored. Florence Kennedy was someone who toured with Gloria Steinem, but you don't really hear about her in the same way we know about Gloria Steinem. And Angela Davis is still out and about. A lot of people, I think she died because she didn't get a lot of notice, but I did notice in researching this that now, who was marketing? There's a free Angela Davis shirt being marketed by some like major clothing company for $500, which leads me into the fourth wave of feminism, which is where we are now. There's a lot going on right now. Sort of the big point for feminism's fourth wave is we're still dealing with this. And that was sort of what I kept coming back to when looking at researching what all I wanted to talk about today. Like with 9 to 5, we are still dealing with a lot of areas in the workforce that the women in 9 to 5 were dealing with. We've just had all this fallout from Harvey Weinstein sexually assaulting women for years and years and years and years and years and getting away with it. This is stuff that's happened recently. The women that this has affected, many of them are my age. We were sort of brought up thinking that a lot of stuff had been made better, but I think a lot of us are discovering that the things we thought were great are actually not as great. The difference about right now is that we do have a lot of technology to be able to help different people get their voices out. We've definitely seen a lot of what some people call hashtag feminism, which is making use of things like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok to introduce new voices to the conversation. So while you have some women who are out there like Emma Watson, very notable feminist, she's a UN Goodwill ambassador. She came through, Harry Potter. She was someone who had a lot of marketing power behind her since literally she was a child. Having things like YouTube, though, has actually really allowed women who didn't come from those same positions of power to get their message out there. One thing that I've really enjoyed have been a lot of the celebrities that we've had come out of YouTube series. So one of my favorite shows is Insecure by Issa Rae. Issa Rae actually made a couple of YouTube series. Awkward Black Girl was, I think, her first one. She made those and then got picked up by HBO. She had, I think, a lot of trouble. She got passed over by a lot of places, which was interesting because meanwhile, HBO was definitely running the TV show Girls, which was about 4 white women in New York, while Issa Rae is a Black woman whose shows primarily focus on her experience as a Black woman in Los Angeles. So she had to do a lot of work to get recognized on the internet, but now she has been picked up. They were nominated for multiple Emmys. In my opinion, she gets looked over far too much. I'm a huge fan of that show. Another TV show that we have thanks to YouTube is Broad City, which is a show that I would highly recommend. Alana Glazer and Abby Jacobson started making that show, and again, it got picked up from that. I think this has been a very exciting time. I'm not going to say that having the internet has given everyone a platform, but I think it has certainly extended the platform to more and more women. I think we're also seeing that in terms of politics. After the 2016 election, we saw a lot more women running for elections, which was really exciting. And we also saw a lot of women who were getting into office through really heavy grassroots efforts. One very famous example of that is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who won a seat that had been held by a male Democrat. She's a female, same political party, but with a different take on it. She won that by really utilizing a lot of grassroots door-to-door efforts, so which was highly enabled by technology. I really think that social media is really changing the game. We've definitely seen a lot of hashtags out there. The most famous recently has been Me Too, which was started by Tarana Burke. I say her name because I don't think she always gets the credit for starting that, and she should. And then this all leads us to the question of why we still need feminism. And this reminded me several years ago, the day of the Women's March in Washington, a former classmate of mine posted on Facebook that she just didn't understand what all of the fuss was about, that other than equal pay, how are women not equal? And I had to sit and think with that for a minute, because saying other than equal pay is a pretty significant thing. Like if equal pay alone were the way in which women did not still have equality, that is huge. Having a paycheck that reflects the work that you're doing and the value that you bring to that work rather than your sex or gender gives you independence and freedom. It means that you're not beholden to a spouse, that it doesn't matter whether you're married or not, which is huge. Yes, women no longer legally belong to their husband, but if you are a woman who's making less than your husband and you're dependent on that, in a lot of ways, stuff hasn't really changed that much. It means being able to afford childcare. Childcare in this country has become prohibitively expensive. Women are usually the ones raising the children. If women cannot afford childcare, then that's going to hinder their abilities. It means being able to make choices about reproductive freedom, whether you're going to have that child in the first place. It means having greater access to education. It means being able to live in a safer neighborhood. And bottom line, we pay for what we give value to. If you were paying a woman less for the same labor and for the same value, you are saying we value you less because you are a woman or because you identify as a woman. But that's not all. Women are dramatically more represented in statistics for intimate partner violence and assault. In fact, 1 in 6 American women have been sexually assaulted or raped, which is very bad if you consider 94% of women who are raped experience PTSD from that. So we have huge numbers of women walking around who are struggling from PTSD from being sexually assaulted. And that is another thing that really cuts across class. Native American women are the most represented in terms of those who have suffered sexual assault or rape. 9 out of 10 victims of sexual assault or rape are female. 48% of that sexual assault and rape happens at home. So we like to think of home as being a place that we're safe and that attacks only happen when you leave the house. That's not the case. 1 in 4 women experience sexual violence, physical violence, and stalking over their lifetime. So think of your friends. Think if you have a group of 4 friends, one of them will have been sexually assaulted or stalked or otherwise abused in their lifetime. Partner violence in 2018 accounted for 20% of all violent crimes. Between 2016 and 2018, that rate increased to 42%. So this is something that's actually getting worse. And the one number that has really stuck out to me is that 1 in 2 female murder victims were killed by their intimate partners. So if you're a woman and you're murdered, there's a really good chance it could be by someone that you're very close to. And I think about that a lot. We also have had a lot of stuff happening in terms of colleges and Title IX and how sexual assault is handled. The Department of Education just passed down new rules. These rulings force colleges to dismiss anything that happens off of campus. The definition of sexual harassment has been narrowed, and survivors now can be cross-examined by a representative of the party's choosing. So that means that if you accuse someone of sexual assault, they can have their parents, friends, fraternity brothers, sorority sisters, whoever, they can have them cross-examine you. Another thing that I think that people don't realize, and one area that I actually am publishing an essay that I'm going to read a very small section of before I wrap up, like 3 sentences. This was something I came across when I was researching that, is that while marital rape, so that's rape that happens within a marriage, may now be technically illegal, there are states that still treat it differently than non-marital rape. In Ohio, it is legal to drug your spouse and rape him or her. In Maryland, Mississippi, Rhode Island, and Oklahoma have similar laws. In Virginia, the perpetrator of marital rape can be sent to therapy in lieu of prison. In Connecticut, prison time is shorter for those who are convicted of marital rape. And then all of these states pale in comparison to South Carolina, which not only requires that marital rape be perpetrated with a higher degree of violence to even be considered rape, but it also gives the victims only 30 days to report it. This is still legal. This is still something that is codified into our law that people are still suffering from. And then finally, because I know that I was here to talk about pop culture, one thing that I also pay a lot of attention to are who gets to tell the stories that are out there in media. We as humans are very drawn to narrative. We see ourselves in terms of narrative, and we understand our values in terms of narrative. And we also learn to empathize with other people from narrative. So the stories that we're seeing on TV and in films are incredibly important to how we understand the world. So it's a little troubling when you realize that of the 100 top grossing films in 2019, women comprise 20% of directors, writers, producers, executive producers, editors, and cinematographers. And that's a really big number. That's more women than have ever been in there before, but that still means that 80% of all of those positions are men. Women accounted for 12% of directors working on the top 100 grossing films in 2019. That was actually up 4%, up from 4% in 2018. So women are still drastically underrepresented in who is telling us these stories. And I think that's what I would leave you with. When you think about pop culture and feminism, it's important to see who is telling the story and what point of view the story is coming from. And that matters because we take with us from those stories ideas about policy change or ideas about how we treat other people. And if we're hearing all of that from one person's background, then that really, I think, affects how we see everyone else in the world. So that's an area where you really want to pay attention to. One of the things that I really encourage people to do is go out there and seek out the filmmakers who are female, also seek out filmmakers and television directors that are female and people of color. Look for things that are created from someone different from you, and I think that will teach you a lot. So yeah, that is my talk. And I understand that y'all might have some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. I really found a lot of that interesting because I didn't know a lot of the facts that you talked about in terms of like the marriageable rape and stuff like that. So that was very interesting. So we have about 8 questions. So the first one is, it's kind of more about you, just asking, how many years have you worked at Georgia College, and how do you feel like how you've impacted the community during your time here?
I have actually just celebrated 5 years at Georgia College, which is exciting because I've never been anywhere this long. So where I work helping our students who are applying for nationally competitive scholarships and fellowships. I do that as part of my work with the honors program. And I have helped a lot of our students apply for and receive awards that have taken them to some really exciting places. We had a student who is now at the University of Cambridge studying. We've had students go do research in Finland, to teach across the world. And so I think that the biggest impact I've helped to have, because these students already had the potential, but was helping students realize their potential and go off and do these great experiences that will make them better researchers and citizens.
Okay. The next question is, what is your biggest focus within the movement towards global gender equality? Or what do you think should be the biggest focus of other people who are really in that community?
So globally, I think that's a little tough because so many of our different countries are dealing with many different things. However, I do think that gender-based violence is probably the area to start. Like I talked about, it's still something that we're suffering drastically from in the US, quite dramatically. And it's happening in countries across the world, just within different contexts. So, and also if you look at the Maslow's pyramid of needs, physical safety is one of the most important things there. So if we're not able to keep women safe, then where are we as a society?
Gotcha. Thank you. The next one is, what advice do you have for college students at Georgia College who want to make a difference in gender equality?
So I think we have some really great resources with the Women's Center. I would definitely recommend getting involved in any of the activities. I think we've got Project Brave and Braveheart, specifically speaking of gender-based violence. Those organizations have been really helpful in shining some lights on these issues. So I would definitely recommend getting involved in that. For those of you who might be interested in doing undergraduate research, if you're in a discipline where you might be able to maybe do some research into some feminist related areas, I think that also can be helpful. Of course, that's, if you're in physics, that's probably, physics of feminism isn't a thing. But if you're if you're an English major, looking at researching maybe some overlooked female writers would also be a great thing to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because this is actually my second class that I've taken that has to do with kind of feminism and that sort of stuff. So the next question is, who is your feminist idol?
I think sort of the obvious, so I've got two. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I have in action figure form, is one of them, but also my mother is probably actually the first person that would come to mind. My mom raised me as a feminist. I think a lot of parents, especially in the late 80s and early 90s, weren't really doing that. And I remember when I was in middle school and I was winning an award, the teacher said to my mom, "Oh, I think you've got a young feminist on your hands." And the teacher looked like she didn't want to be like offending my mom. When she said that, my mom was super proud. So yeah, my mother.
Gotcha. So the next question is, out of all feminist-based literature you have explored, which do you think would be the most influential to college-age students, or women and men?
So there are 3 books that I recommend. One, I think y'all were maybe reading for class, Roxane Gay, Bad Feminist, was that? Yeah, so that entire essay collection, it has been really influential for me. Another writer who I really like, Rebecca Solnit, she wrote the book Men Explain Things to Me, which she did not coin the term mansplaining. A lot of people think she did, but she didn't. Other people took that from her book. But it's a book that covers actually a lot in the way of gender-based violence. That was also that really stuck out to me. And then there's another book. I guess I've sort of gone on a big focus on gender-based violence, but there's another book that now I have the picture of it in my mind, about gender-based violence. I'm sorry, I forgot it. So we'll just say for my third book, I think Shrill by Lindy West is another book I would recommend people read.
Okay, yeah, we're the second one that you mentioned, we're reading in class, and it's been really interesting, and we've had some good discussions over it. So the next question is, I'm looking through them right here. Do you think more female representation in the media would inspire a more gender equal society?
Yes. I mean, I am someone who comes from my degrees were in English and film studies. I am a creative writer. I so strongly believe in the power of narrative to influence society that I think that the more stories can be told, it's not just from women's perspectives as well. I think also the LGBTQ community, I think communities of color, just having more people's stories told is not just what we need for a more equitable society, but it's also just more interesting. You get tired of hearing the same story over and over again. More voices is good.
So this is just sort of piggybacking off of that. That was off the top of my head. So in terms of women who are social media influences and get a lot of hate for some of the things that they have done in their past, how do you think like women like that, like Kim Kardashian and Beyonce and Selena Gomez and women like them have struggled throughout the times, like because they're putting themselves out there? So how do you think like that can be changed, I guess?
I mean, I think that we have to start actually valuing women. And I think that's a broader societal thing. Again, that sort of goes back to equal pay. You show women that you value them by paying them the same amount of money. You show women you value them in the ways that you talk about them. I think Kim Kardashian is particularly interesting because both she and her husband have major social platforms, but the way that people talk about them is very different. Mostly in terms of people seem obsessed with Kim Kardashian's physicality. Granted, she does bring that up a lot herself, but so much of what is said about those women seems to be said through the lens of how they look. And I think that we have to change how we talk about women. So one example of a really good movie that is one of my favorite movies that I rewatched for like the millionth time this weekend is the movie Booksmart, which is by Olivia Wilde is the director of that movie. So that's an example of, it's a teenage comedy, but it has a female director. And one thing I noticed when I was watching it this weekend was that they do such a good job of not talking about women's physicality in like degrading ways in the way that a lot of teen comedies talk about. So there's one character who's not sample size. She's a curvier woman. Not once is she ever fat shamed or is that ever even brought up. And it's so refreshing to not have that made a thing of. And I think if we had more directors out there who were telling stories from that lens, that would be incredibly helpful for changing the way that we as a society treat and interact with women.
Gotcha. So kind of piggybacking off of that for our next question, in terms of change, do you think that feminism is being more accepted by men today and that it has grown?
Yeah, yes and no. I think that's what is happening right now, and it's a result of both our political and also technology-driven climate, is that there are a lot of louder voices. I think that there are men out there who are feeling more comfortable with identifying as feminists. But I also think that there are men, women, there are people who feel more emboldened to use their social media platforms or hide behind their computers, more accurately probably, to say really degrading and hateful things. So maybe overall, yes, the term feminist is becoming more accepted. I think Barack Obama calling himself a feminist was huge, but I do think that there's another side to that where there is sort of been a backlash.
Gotcha. So someone watching asked or commented about Georgia College, that Georgia College has a major in gender and sexuality through the liberal studies program, and that they can actually minor in gender and women's study. And I was just wondering if you know anything about that or if you can elaborate on it at all.
Yeah, so that's part of our liberal studies department. And for those of you who are not aware of our liberal studies department, I would definitely recommend looking into it and talking to your advisor about it. I've worked with several students who have used liberal studies to really tailor their studies to their own interests. You can actually do a lot flexibly with that, and you can do a lot with interdisciplinary courses. So with pretty much all of the courses in liberal studies, you're taking classes from different disciplines. And so you'd be looking at that from a whole lot of different lenses. So if you know that you're passionate about women and gender studies, but think that you could look at it from a lot of different ways, great. That's actually a really big part of the liberal arts mission is interdisciplinarity. So I would definitely recommend talking to your advisor. That department does a lot of really fantastic things.
So I think this is going to be our last question because we're slowly running out of time. But how do you think we can change the connotation around feminism? And what do you think are the first steps to try to do that?
Like with so many things, representation. I think that the more people and the more different people who use the word feminism, like I had a quote that I've now lost by Mindy Kaling, who talked about how she considers herself to be a feminist, but she's also super feminine. And I reflect back on that quote from Evangeline Lilly, who seemed to suggest that feminists are all like, look one specific way. Feminists, just like pretty much any category, you can look a whole different ways and still be one. So the more people who are out there not being afraid to use the F word, actually using it to apply it to themselves, that's just going to help.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed, and I know my group members enjoyed listening to what you had to say about feminism. Thank you to everyone who came and watched our Facebook Live, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned some new things. Bye.
Thank you.